All right. Waited a couple minutes now, so let's get started. My name is Kyle Shagnon. I'm a marketing manager here at OpFocus. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on this Wednesday afternoon. We're really excited to get started with our first ever strategy for Tech Stack Consolidation Ask Me Anything session. Many of you submitted questions when registering, and you are welcome to drop additional questions during the conversation as well. Jim will be answering as many questions as time will allow for, but we may not be able to get to every question that folks submitted. This question will be recorded and a copy will be made available to you after the fact through email. So with that out of the way, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our experts for the day. Jim Parker is our Senior Growth Advisor in the SaaS Growth Advisory practice, and he has extensive experience helping companies successfully integrate new acquisitions, implement processes, and organizational changes, as well as consolidate multiple tech stacks. So he's really a true expert in the topic of the day. I'd also like to introduce Jim Simon, the VP of Professional Services here at OpFocus. He holds an impressive 5 Salesforce certifications, including Advanced Platform Developer, Sales Cloud Consultant, and Community Cloud Consultant. Jim oversees our delivery team at OpFocus, which has completed over 100 projects for our SaaS clients. Our team, so with that being said, I'll go ahead and hand things over to Jim Parker.
Great. Thank you very much, Kyle. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Super. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining today. And just literally looking down those who have joined us on the call today, I'm sure there's some lessons we can learn from folks on this call. So there's some definitely folks on the call who have, amongst our clients, who have had some great experience in this area as well. A lot of our clients have really kind of experienced sort of transformative results as a result of engaging in this type of sort of an org consolidation or tech stack consolidation project, and other stuff as well, other types of projects. And just a couple of quotes here from two clients on some of the results that they've seen as part of their journey with OpFocus. I was actually, as some of you on the call know, a 2-time client of OpFocus before joining the team. So I experienced personally some of that transformative work that OpFocus has been so successful at. Most of our clients are SaaS companies who are going through rapid growth, both organically and through acquisitions. And as many of you know, I'm sure we could all, lots of us on this call, share battle stories. That process of bringing on a whole new organization, a whole new entity, it can be exciting. It can be fun, it can be exhilarating, it can also be challenging and stressful and difficult. And there's just a myriad of issues to deal with as we go through that process, from an organizational standpoint, from a process standpoint, certainly from a technology and tech stack perspective. So we're open today to answer a few of the questions that have been posed to us. Thanks for submitting those as you registered. And hopefully we can uncover some things today that will make the process a little bit easier for each of you going through a similar experience. So I think, Kyle, we're probably ready to jump into our first question. You want to kind of give us kind of a sense of how this process will work?
Sure. So again, I know many of you submitted questions when registering. We will address those. You're also welcome to submit them live during this call. So again, you can do that through the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And when Jim calls on you, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you so you can ask your question and elaborate on it, explain it as much as you would like. Please state your name, your role, and the number of users that you have, and then we'll take a minute to ask your question. Jim will then take 5 to 8 minutes answering your question to the best of his ability with the amount of that time. We'd like to make sure that we can get through as many questions as possible today. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and pass things over to you, Jim, for our first question.
Okay, so Kimberly, do we have Kimberly Smersich? Kimberly, did I get your name, your last name right there? from InMotion now. You had a really great sort of opening question. Do you want to pose that to the group?
Yes. Jim, can you go ahead and make me the host again so I can unmute Kimberly?
Sure. There we go.
Perfect. All right, Kimberly, you have the ability to speak now.
Hello, my name is Kimberly Smersic. You got very, very close, Jim. I appreciate the effort on that. I am Sales Operations Manager, and we have about 55 users in our org. And my question that I presented when I registered was, when a company goes through a merger or an acquisition, do you have any advice on when to determine if you are going to continue to operate, two separate Salesforce instances, fold one into the other, or just start completely from fresh? Thank you.
Super. Yeah, thank you, Kimberly, very much. And it's a fantastic question because it's a decision that every organization has to make as they consider an acquisition. Sometimes that question may be considered a little too late. So kudos to you for thinking about it in advance of the acquisition happening. And based on my experience, it's never sort of, there's never a clear black and white answer to that question. The best place to start, I think, however, is to do a sort of a side-by-side process analysis. Typically, the incoming organization, right, has a different way of doing things, a different way of operating than perhaps you've been doing. And as a result, their Salesforce org and all of the surrounding applications are also being used in a different way. I'm sort of a big believer in the old adage of people, process, and systems, and how that it's absolutely critical that you understand the way that the organizations have been operating from a process standpoint before you make that determination. Generally speaking, from what I've seen, there's good, and there are things that you will want to preserve, typically coming from both organizations. You may have implemented some best practices in certain areas, and the incoming organization may have implemented some best practices, and so oftentimes it'll end up being a bit of a hybrid solution. Rarely have I seen organizations just say, we're just going to start from scratch. I've gotten close a few times, but generally speaking, that the cost and effort of doing that usually, unless the org is really, really broken, the cost of doing that sort of outweighs the benefit of starting from scratch. But that is certainly a viable option. If your intention is to continue acquisitions, obviously starting from scratch each time doesn't make a lot of sense. So picking the org that has sort of the most good to retain is the best approach. And let me just share with you a couple of slides that might be helpful as well. I would suggest going through, and by the way, I think we can provide you after the call with some templates that can help you through this process a little bit. But I would start with sort of a high level prioritization of your most important processes. Where are the areas, as a result of bringing in this new organization, this new acquisition, where are the areas that we really want to focus and we want to make sure are optimized? And start there, right? Build a strong foundation, a strong base around the processes that are most important to you as a company, or the processes perhaps that are in most need of improvement. And kind of go through a list like this. I know it seems maybe a little bit daunting, but go through and just kind of pick out the top 5 or 10 process areas, maybe 15, that you want to focus on. And then take the time to sit down and have a working session to talk through the two processes. How are things done today in the current org? How are things done in the incoming org and in the organization itself, not just the Salesforce org, but in general? How are people working together? How are you operating? What are the key handoffs? And how are those handoffs, how effective are those handoffs today? There's some sort of helpful criteria that you can also use to evaluate those processes. Let me, these are 4 that we commonly use when deciding like which org do I keep. But these very same criteria can be used when evaluating, multiple tools that are doing the same thing, or multiple processes. So it doesn't have to be just at an org level. But I always start with the question of how effective is the current process? Like, are we driving the right behaviors? Are we getting the results that we're expecting based on our key business metrics? Is the current process working as we intend it to work? Then say, okay, based on that, how mature are the various processes? We might have a process that's very effective, but that's not scalable, or that involves a whole lot of manual steps and manual processes. And so that's another criteria to just say how sophisticated or how automated are the 2 processes? Will one approach allow us to scale more easily in the future, adapt to changes in our business and in the market and so forth, and do sort of an assessment along those lines. And then oftentimes the question of data comes into play. And that could be both a question of volume of data, so which org has the most information in it, but perhaps more importantly is how complete and accurate and meaningful or valuable is the data that is in each of the orgs and in the processes that are producing that data. And do we have what we need from a future business standpoint to make good management decisions? And then last, it might be least, I'm not sure, but how well is the process being used today? Do users like it? Do we have good adoption? The best laid process is no good if your users aren't actually utilizing it. So a quick discussion around adoption and challenges that you may have there is also a great place to start. So again, just to kind of recap, I would definitely take the time to decide up front what are the critical areas that we're going to focus on, prioritize those, and then take the opportunity, sit down together with folks who understand your processes and the incoming processes, and do a side-by-side evaluation of each of those processes. And then you have to make a call. Do we sort of just stick with what we're doing? Do we adopt perhaps some of the processes from the new acquisition and create more of a hybrid, or do we potentially utilize their org and then go from there? As I mentioned, I think probably 9 times out of 10 you're going to find that there's good that can be harvested from both and combined for the best overall solution.
Thank you very much. That was very insightful.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, let's see here. We had a question from Donna from NetBrain. Donna Schleiper. Did I get that name right?
Yep, you did. Yeah, Schleiper.
Schleiper. Okay.
Thanks so much for taking my question. Yeah, so my name's Donna Schleiper from NetBrain, senior sales operations analyst over here. We have approximately just under 300 Salesforce users. And really, my question is, as your company is growing and scaling, you kind of have some maybe legacy or older processes in your system, and as your company grows and scales, how should you effectively assess those processes already in existence to determine should we keep them and evolve them, or reevaluate and maybe create new ones from the ground up?
Okay. So great question. Thanks, Donna. And I'll also, if it's okay, also touch on a little bit of the question you posed around kind of how to best manage, right, those, so the rapid change that we experience. So in addition to being a believer in the people process, or as part of being a believer in the people process system sort of mantra, I think it's super important for us as sales ops or rev ops leaders to be in sort of close touch with our users. And I'm not saying that everything that users ask for we should do. We'll talk more about that probably later on in the call as well. But certainly understanding sort of on the front lines what's happening and how effective the processes are that our users are being asked to do. And that's I've done a couple of different things. One is you can certainly periodically ask, right, your users. And I found it really helpful to create a sort of a pool of, I call them super users or Salesforce champions within the organization, people that are sort of process oriented and who have their finger on the pulse of what everybody else on the team is doing. Folks who sort of know what the shadow processes are that are going on and are willing to kind of be open with you about how things are going. So having sort of a few people that you can tap into on the front lines to get some intel on how well things are working is super valuable. And then having periodically taking some time to do what they used to call, I think, contextual inquiry, where you basically watch what your users are doing, can be super valuable. So you simply, find some willing folks and observe for a few hours or days. What are they doing? Why did you go through those 10 clicks to get there? Or why is it that you download this and start doing stuff in Excel as opposed to doing it in the system? As sort of anecdotal examples, that can really help expose both process problems, areas where you can optimize, as well as potential training issues. Do our users simply not know what the tools are capable of, or what the standard process or the preferred process should be? And then I'd say lastly, and this kind of begins to answer some of the other question you asked around sort of managing rapid change while trying to maintain an org, and that goes to governance. And I know governance might be, that term has lots of meanings to lots of people, sometimes positive, sometimes not so positive. But from my perspective, governance simply means ensuring that we're doing the right things, the most important things for the business, for the organization. We can still move fast, but we do so in a way that avoids the pitfalls of not taking the time to carefully evaluate process changes. And we all have struggled with this need for rapidly changing and adapting. I'm just going to put a slide up here for a second while I talk to this a little bit. With the need to rapidly change while also sort of keeping the boat afloat, right? And ultimately, the best outcome is to put into place a simple set of processes and cadences that will ensure that we're we're effectively intaking new requests and new needs, while at the same time, maintaining the status quo. And it's obviously super important that the process that we put in place gives us time to understand the requirement, make sure that those requirements are documented, that we have a cross-functional review from all of the various stakeholders. And I'm guessing, Donna, with 300 users, you may have more than just, for instance, sales in your Salesforce org. Mm-hmm. So making sure that there's sort of cross-functional representation from all of the stakeholders in Salesforce, and then ensuring that we take the time to review before it's actually implemented a solution, right? So what exactly is the proposed solution to the business need, and does that solution actually meet the sort of the fundamental business requirement that's being addressed? The danger of simply reacting, right, to every request without a process like that in place is that over time you just layer process on top of process, or tool on top of tool, or enhancement on top of enhancement, and you end up with an unmanageable system. Lots of customization, people doing things a whole bunch of different ways, and the system becomes unmanageable and people stop using the system. So you now have an adoption problem. So I think just putting in place some simple governance. It doesn't have to be burdensome. It doesn't have to slow down your process, but just a couple of sort of key points around that governance. I think it's super critical to have some sort of a steering committee, right, who sees the big picture, sponsored or chaired by one of the executives, who has the broader organizational picture and strategic picture in mind. So that as new requests come in, or as the need for process occurs, you have someone sitting in that group who can help to really provide guidance and steering. And they also can help, or that group can also help establish priorities for changes that occur. And then you also need a team that is dealing with more of the mundane, like the day-to-day stuff, right? Actually building requirements, building the solution, reviewing the solution, testing the solution, and so forth. So, sort of a working cross-functional team that should include both business users and IT users. There was another question posed about that we'll talk about in just a little while. But that working group, that Salesforce core team, is really, they're the ones that actually are responsible for making stuff happen and ensuring that things are aligned to the overall strategy. I think it's super important that your requirements come from business users. And there's sort of two aspects of that. One is making sure that your business users are articulating their business requirements, not the solution, right? We should leave the solutioning to those who have a good, solid understanding of the technology itself and the best practices for implementing those requirements. Super important also for those business users to be able to articulate the justification or the business case for the change. And maybe some of those will come from you, some of those will come from business users. And then just a good rigorous process for testing, for deploying, for ensuring that you're using sandbox environments, to move changes around. And then the step that's absolutely critical is communicating, training, and enabling our users to actually adopt the process. And I found it super helpful to be communicating way in advance of the change actually being made, communicate at the time the change is made, and communicate after the change is made what has occurred to ensure that there's that adequate time for understanding, sort of preparation, and then understanding, and then enablement. So I think, I guess maybe the other thing is division of responsibilities. This kind of gets us a little bit into the question about the relationship between business users or RevOps and IT, but definitely having sort of a division of responsibility between those who are sort of thinking process-wise versus those who are and future-wise versus those who are maintaining the status quo. Okay, Donna, thanks for that question.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see. We had a question come in regarding selling of new processes or features to stakeholders and end users. And that came from Kayla McNeil. Kayla, are you on the line? Yeah, you are. You want to just pose your question to us?
Hi, and sorry, I just realized there's mowing going on behind me, so it might be a little loud. But
No
yes,
problem.
I'm an implementation manager at Level Access, and I just had questions around, we have a lot of like issues with, I would say, communicating a lot of our processes and, producing a lot of information so that we're super cohesive. So I wanted to get a little bit more guidance on that.
Okay. Okay, great. So, and actually maybe I'll have Jim Simon, if I can put you on the spot for a second. He has utilized a great model that came out of MIT to help kind of frame our thinking around, how integrated, how unified we want our processes should be, which I think is the first step to the question that you're posing there, Kayla. And so Jim, do you mind if I flip it over to you for a second? You want to
No, not
take
at
that
all.
one?
Kayla, great question. I'd love to just get a little clarification to make sure I do understand your question. Are you asking in terms of what's the best way to think about your processes holistically and how those build synergies together? Or are you more asking about your team is doing a lot of awesome stuff? How do you get the word out? How do you communicate the cool stuff you're doing, the process stuff you're doing, or solicit, hey, we need help from the business to collaborate and drive process evolution? So I think those are two different things. I'd love to just spend a second to make sure I understand your question. And if I didn't get either of those right, please feel free to clarify.
No, they're both right, actually, because it's both are what's the word I'm looking for? Are relevant because we do a lot of really cool stuff, but getting the word out and getting buy-in from everyone is challenging. Mm-hmm. So I have my own ideas, but it still feels like sometimes I'm spinning a little bit, and I want to maybe there's a better way, that I can get that information out and get adoption.
Sure. So I can use a few things that I've done in the past in previous roles to OpFocus, but it's kind of fun, right? What I've done before was essentially hold demo days, something very simple, right? You don't have to require business folks to join, right? But during lunch, make it a lunch demo day and say, sort of two purposes. One is to get out the word, all the cool stuff that your awesome team has done, and folks that are business users get to come and revel in the awesomeness that they hopefully are participating in. But they can also get ideas in terms of, you might have worked on some cool feature or some, cool process builder or some cool UI for this one group, but another group has no idea that that's there, and they come and look and go, wow, that's fantastic, I can use that too. So you're giving value back to those business users as well. And the other thing it serves too is you start to get your admins or your folks that are in the system hopefully very proud of the things that they're building, get them more excited. So now you're building, even bigger and better champions within your group. They're proud of their work. So hosting, a variety of lunch and learns and demo days for the stuff that you did is I've had good success with that. Building on the demo day idea, you can also hold demos on cool new Salesforce features. There might be some stuff that you're not using, some stuff that you think that you or your team are very interested in, but you don't yet know how you would use that in the course of your business, right? And so sometimes holding lunch and learn on cool Salesforce products or features and invite business user to it might actually generate excitement about that or generate a good use case to where you just were unaware of. So it's another way to engage with the business users and give that value back, because of course you want to draw them to that meeting, right? I'd say something also very tactical you can do, and I'll stop after this third point. Actually, I think I have 2 more points. One is building on what Jim had suggested prior. Third point would be suggested, everybody does millions of different revisions of or versions of Salesforce release notes, right? So I'd say you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Find, 3 times a year Salesforce does the release. Find your favorite blog or whoever does Salesforce releases out there, condense that down a little bit, tailor it to your audience, and push that information out, right? It doesn't have to, again, be with features that your team is using, but the idea there is, hey, look at all this cool new stuff. Condense it down so your business users understand that, hey, there's a reports and dashboards feature, here's what it means. And so now you're kind of generating more involvement, more ideas to get them to come to you. So it's another way of building involvement. And I said the last one is building on what Jim Parker had said, which is essentially appoint representatives or appoint business champions, right, within each group. And at my last company, I went so far as advocating, and eventually we made this happen, to where each business manager at the director level and sometimes down to the managerial level actually had Salesforce responsibility, in their job role. They weren't in there being an admin, but they were formally the person go-to per group, and that was actually built into their job description. Now, really, that sorts of build that advocacy. It builds a funnel in terms of those business users now that are within the group can have a point of contact, a representative. They can go to that person, and ideas can start to elevate from there. But it was built into their job description, saying you're the Salesforce point champion and advocate for this group. So I'll pause there. Hopefully, I touch base on some of the question, or the majority of your question.
Yeah, that was actually great. I love the release notes idea and appointing a business champion in each group, because that will be super helpful to especially aggregate a lot of requests that we're starting to get now. Finding that me and maybe one other person are the point people with Salesforce, and I'm not a Salesforce admin, just someone who's super interested. And I think that'll really, really help, and then selling it across the board. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I just want to echo that that point about the I call them the Salesforce Champions group. Not only can they help you in gathering feedback and ideas and so forth, but and maybe Jim, you mentioned it and I missed it, but just helping to drive adoption of things that are already out there. At one organization that I worked with, we didn't really have a formal training team, right? We used those super users, those champions out in the organization to really drive the training and adoption. And we had a cool logo. There was like a Superman logo with Salesforce on the front, and it was considered cool to be a Salesforce champion and sort of have access to early information about stuff that was coming down the pike and help drive that adoption. So wholeheartedly agree with that. Thanks very much for that great question. We had another question about about driving business process and tech staff alignment, not tech stack alignment, but how do we keep our business process people, our business people, and our tech staff aligned as we go through a consolidation or just in general maintaining the Salesforce tech stack and surrounding tools. And that absolutely is a challenge. And if there's not good alignment, as I'm sure many of us have experienced, we can rapidly start producing solutions that are inconsistent with the needs of our users. And not to harp on the not to harp on the governance message, but I think really having some cross-functional alignment, like a cross-functional process that everyone has agreed to and that is led, I think, by the business is absolutely critical, right? So led by RevOps or led by sales ops, but involving folks from IT or the tech staff, the Salesforce admins or developers and so forth. And then having that clear process for intaking and prioritizing and reviewing and so forth is absolutely critical. Also, ensuring that there is good documentation both around the requirements and around the solution. I think I mentioned that before. One of the pitfalls is having business users articulate their needs, and the technology folks running off and building something and never sort of closing the loop, right? And so having your business users, the folks, a sampling of folks that are going to have to actually use the solution, involved in the review of the solution before it's built, and then in the testing of the solution is super helpful. And then I would say more on the sort of the organizational side of things. I think it's super helpful to hire the right folks. To hire folks on the tech side that have a bit of business acumen, as well as hiring folks on the business side who have a bit of technical acumen. It just makes those conversations between the two so much more productive, and eliminate a lot of the conflict and some of the challenges that can sometimes arise there. I think hiring people who have sort of a process orientation, right, who understand the importance of a consistent and structured way of doing things in order to produce consistent outcomes is super helpful. And then having people, whether it's on the IT side or the business side, who are good at translating, business speak, business requirements into more of those technical and sort of workable solutions, also super helpful. And then last but not least, I always, as a RevOps leader, I always wanted my business folks to take training, right? I wanted them to take Salesforce training so that they had the language, they had a way of describing their needs, and they had exposure to features and functionality in the platform to make their communications with their colleagues on the tech staff much more productive. So I would strongly advocate for both sides of that equation to get trained on Salesforce, just to drive that common language and that alignment.
Jim, just add a few points if you don't mind.
Sure.
One is really around how do you know if you are misaligned, right? How do you know if your processes, your tech staff, are misaligned? And things that I've noticed in the past, and obviously this is assuming you don't have a proper governance structure in place, but things to look out for. Most typically, organizations will have shadow IT, what is called shadow IT groups, right? And groups are all kind of doing their own IT themselves. So that's one indicator. Other less, other subtle indicators are when you have too many apps or too many tools in the business. And building on that, folks that where there's significant misalignment tend to take more of a tools first approach to solve a problem because they're not driven by the process. Tech folks tend to think, hey, I'm going to implement a tool to solve a problem. But I think most folks on the call obviously realize, it's people process, prior to that. So those are sort of three things to look out for. Is if you have the rumblings of shadow IT happening, you have too many tools or just a significant amount of apps and tools in the enterprise, and you tend to take a tools first approach. These are leading indicators that there's misalignment between people, process, and the technology side of the equation. Governance and a steering committee often will help realign those.
Excellent, thanks, Jim. Okay, we also had a question from, doesn't look like this person is on the call, but asking a question about the best way to evaluate whether we can or need to consolidate the tech stack. In other words, are there vendors out there that can provide sort of the whole solution, all in one platform? And how do we go about determining whether or not to consolidate? Which is a great question, and I think particularly in the last, I don't know, five years or so, this proliferation of add-ons, of additional tools, it's virtually impossible these days to keep up on all of the new tools. Some of them very, very helpful, very, very powerful, that are coming into the market. I think in general, the critical things are to make sure you understand what your true needs are, and then to periodically assess how are those needs changing, and how does our current tech stack meet those needs, which really means you need to document your tech stack, right? What are all of the tools that we're currently using, and what's the purpose of those tools, and how well are they meeting our needs? And generally speaking, there are trade-offs, right? There are trade-offs that have to be made. Rarely is there a single solution that provides all of the functionality that we need in one package. So, we are certainly advocates of doing a careful vendor evaluation, taking a look at multiple options, perhaps doing proof of concepts with some of the vendors. Let your users actually get their hands on the tool to see how it feels, see how it works, how easy is it to use, that sort of thing, before making a buying decision. And oftentimes we find that a particular tool has been implemented, and it might have been implemented to solve one particular business problem, and yet there is much more functionality available within that tool to serve other needs within the business. So going through a regular process with your vendors to say, hey, show me what's new, right? Let's have a session where you talk to me a little bit about functionality within your solution. What are we not using today that we might want to consider going forward? That can oftentimes help eliminate the need to just buy another tool. So many of the vendors out there today are really broadening their offerings to provide more than just one feature or one function. Okay, we also had a question come in through the Q&A. Chris Duncombe, do you want to, there you are. you want to share your question with us?
Yeah, so we're a traditional perpetual company. That's our flagship product, and but we're private equity owned. We're making a lot of changes, and we're trying to go, more towards a SaaS model, recurring revenue model. So my question is around when you start to use more SaaS-y, no pun intended, metrics, ARR, monthly recurring revenue, stuff like that. When you talk to Salesforce, they'll tell you, oh, CPQ is meant for that, use CPQ data. I'm just curious what you've seen and what you recommend using. Do you see people using their Salesforce CRM data, or should we be using ERP data, as that's kind of the official source of truth for financials when it comes to those SaaS metrics like that?
Yeah, fantastic question. Let me give you sort of my experience, and then I'll let Jim, the other Jim, weigh in here as well. And I come from a finance background, so I completely understand why you're asking the question, Chris. It's an important one. So Salesforce is not an ERP system, and so I think it's from a SaaS metrics perspective, it's great for doing things like forecasting of deals to close, or to provide directionally correct information around some of those critical SaaS metrics like ARR and MRR and so forth. So I would absolutely use it for the purposes of the purposes typically that sales needs. I don't see a need for them to be leveraging the ERP system or another system to get the basic metrics that they need to be directionally correct for things like forecasting, probably for things like sales compensation and so forth. But from a financial reporting standpoint, reporting to the board of directors, reporting to shareholders, any sort of regulatory compliance, that sort of thing. In my opinion, that information should come out of the company's financial system, where you can be a little more fine-tuned than what you probably want to try to be doing in Salesforce. So we're big fans of Salesforce CPQ. We do lots of CPQ work for clients, and I think our position, generally speaking, is use it for what it's designed for, which is configuring, pricing, quoting, forecasting, that sort of thing. But for true financial reporting, use your ERP system. Jim, Simon, anything you want to add?
I think, and I agree with that. I think to answer it with a true consulting answer, both, right? I'd say both systems, right? Because we have different users of that data. Typically, you have sales, client success, living in the CRM system, right? So they want to be armed with that data to help make decisions around, renewals, account strategies, et cetera. So I'd say that data needs to be updated and very relevant in Salesforce. But of course, from a GL financial reporting perspective, board level reporting perspective, we need to have confidence in that data. And more often than not, since an ERP or a financial ERP system has been around for generations, and has a lot more built-in controls with that, we tend to trust the more ERP system first over Salesforce and the CRMs that change a lot. So to go back, and what I was suggesting is both, right? The data needs to be, in my opinion, readily available in both, typically through some level of integration, because there's different users of both of those systems. Now, I do agree we do have to identify a single source of truth. And for me personally, as long as we can get a high level of confidence that the metrics are correct in the source system, it shouldn't matter where the source of truth system, lies. Just be highly confident that this data is accurate. It's not going to change. We can audit its controls, which again, traditionally that has lived in an ERP system. So a lot of folks naturally want to push these important metrics to that system. But as long as have confidence, get the pieces of data connected. There's no reason why they can't live in harmony together and live in both systems. They just need to be updated. And so hopefully that provides a different, a different skew or answer, but that's how I tend to think about things, is break it down. Who are the consumers of that data? And often the consumers of that data reside in different systems. And so that data should be flowing. And I'm sure Chris at Imprivata, you've probably mapped out a data flow or some type of data strategy in identifying that. So it's just important you have that written down. So it shouldn't matter where it lives, as long as you have a high level of confidence and the users in those key systems have access to it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chris. All right. And we also got a question about how to justify or how to promote features or functionality within the system to stakeholders and users. We touched a little bit on this earlier, but oftentimes, those of us that are really close to the Salesforce platform, we hear about or we see, with each new release, some great new functionality. And we want our organizations to adopt that functionality, and yet there may be resistance or hesitancy to do so. And we probably have a whole discussion around change management and that sort of thing. But what can we do sort of organizationally to help move things forward, right? Help the organization move forward and utilize some of the tools and the functionality that's available to us. And the phrase that comes to mind as I read that question, really is that results always speak louder than words. And if there is if there is functionality that you feel passionate about, that you feel like has real business value, build the case for it. And that doesn't have to be an onerous process, but take a little bit of time to do things like, run a little bit of your own pilot, of the new process or of the feature. Get a couple of folks who are early adopters, who are open to change, changing the way they're operating. Recruit them to help you do sort of a proof of concept or a trial, and then track the difference, right? Measure the difference in the amount of time that it takes them to create an opportunity or a quote, or the amount of time that it takes to get a contract signed. Whatever the case may be, measure the current way and then measure the new and better way to produce those measurable results, and then make sure that you're presenting those results to a leader who can make that change, make that determination. I think to myself I'm guessing many of you are probably already using e-signature technology, but there even today sometimes we find organizations who have not fully adopted it yet. And I think about we at one organization measured the difference in signature time for e-sig versus a traditional, the rep downloading the contract, attaching it to an email, sending it off, and so forth. And it went from, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it went from several days, right, using the traditional process, to literally the average turnaround time was, I think, less than an hour. It was in minutes. And that kind of a difference is enough to rapidly change executive minds about the value that a different way of doing business, in this case e-signature, would have on the business, avoiding slip deals, et cetera, et cetera. So, okay, if we have not gotten to your question, we tried to pick the questions that had sort of the most interest today, but if there are other questions that you have, we'd love to continue engaging with you. I know we're almost to the top of the hour, so Kyle, why don't I turn it back over to you?
Perfect. Well, thank you, Jim Parker and Jim Simon. That was extremely insightful, and I'm glad we were able to get to so many questions today. If you did enjoy your time with this session, we do plan to have more Ask Me Anything sessions in the coming weeks, so keep an eye out for those. If you'd like to learn more about the strategy for tech stack consolidation, our website does feature a number of blogs that we put together that outline some of the best practices and projects. As Jim mentioned, we're also more than happy to connect if you have a project ongoing that you would like to discuss in a bit more detail. So again, I'd like to thank you for joining us. We'll send out a follow-up email with a recording on, I believe, Monday, and a survey on your experience. We're always trying to improve, so we'd love your feedback. So with that being said, have a great rest of your week, and we do hope to see you again. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.